Hi, that's me. Y'all, I'm so happy to be here today because 24 hours ago I was stuck in Warsaw, Poland. My flight had been canceled back to the United States, and I was just thinking, if I can just get through this, I can get back and talk to a room full of beautiful change makers. Today, I want to talk to you about change. I want to talk about how to design change, how to go out into the world and intentionally cause change to happen. I'll share some ideas that I have about how to make change happen better, more sustainably, happier. So back in the first century, there was a guy named Plutarch. Plutarch was walking along the harbor one day and he saw a ship that belonged to a war hero named Theseus. The ship had been there in the harbor for hundreds of years as a statue to previous war victories. Over time, the water had worn away the wood of the ship, and the shipbuilders had been replacing its planks one by one. So Plutarch thought, is this really the same boat that Theseus stood on? I don't think it is, he wrote. And he wondered at what point it became a different boat. Was it the first plank that was changed? Was it the last one? Philosophers have been arguing about this for a long time because that's what philosophers do. But this is one of my favorite ways to think about change. Because if you look at it one step at a time, it's really hard to see. But if you stick with it for a while and keep changing the planks one by one, eventually you can look back and see you have a whole new boat. My ship of Theseus is a website called bit.ly.com. I started at Bitly almost a year ago, and when I started, the website hadn't been changed in 4 years. Wow, somebody said wow. That's what I thought too. So I wanted to change it. Now the reasons why it hadn't changed aren't really important. We'll get into that in a minute. But I want to tell you the story about how I changed bit.ly.com. Before I do that, I want to give everybody a couple of seconds. We're going to close our eyes and we're going to visualize whatever it is y'all are trying to change. It can be the products you're building, it can be the processes at work, it can be somebody else's mind. So I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds and take a deep breath. All right, keep that in mind as we talk about change. The first challenge that you are going to face when you try to change anything is called the institutional immune system. The institutional immune system works just like your body's immune system in that it protects your company from foreign invasion, namely a foreign invasion of new ideas. Now, your company's immune system might be people who benefit from the status quo. It could be reporting lines or processes or just quirks in your office layout. But if you want to actually go out and get change done, you're going to have to beat the immune system. It's very daunting. So the first question is, where do you start? And just like the ship of Theseus, you have to start at the beginning with the first plank. My advice to you is to start small. It can be tempting to make a very ambitious plan, to spend nights and weekends drafting up a big vision for how you're going to change things. At a previous job, we called these Death Stars, and you all know what happens to Death Stars. So start small, because your first job when changing things is to build trust with the people around you. 3 guidelines for your first plank. First, find an edge. Start with something that's a little bit out of the critical function of the business. Don't start with anything that has revenue impact, and don't replace anybody else's job. The second rule is to minimize your resource requirements. If your first blank is something that you can change all by yourself on your own time, you're going to avoid alerting the immune system. And then third, get ready to scale. Because once you start to build that momentum and that trust, you're going to want to keep it up. So lay the groundwork for the scaling that's going to happen. The first plank that I started with, no, I didn't accidentally include Bitly's financial statements in this presentation. The first plank that I started with at work was PowerPoint slides. I wanted to change the way we did design for the web, and I figured that nobody would really object if I spruced up our PowerPoint slides a little bit. This is actually an example of a slide that was used at a quarterly board meeting. I've obviously replaced all of the important information, but y'all can probably relate to the fact that this is just kind of how we communicate at work. I thought this was a great idea to introduce my colleagues to some ideas that would show up later in the website redesign. So I asked for permission to redesign the slide templates, and I, not surprisingly, didn't really hear a lot of response because nobody really cares about these things. I redesigned them, and this isn't earth-shattering stuff, but I was able to show my team that they could trust me with the design decisions that we were making. After I rolled the new templates out and the company had their quarterly board meeting, the COO came and found me and he said, "Matt, I'm so excited. These slides are really awesome." Like, when was the last time your COO came to you and was like, "You did a good job. You're doing really great"? It doesn't happen to me very often as a designer. But I knew I had made a really great connection with an important stakeholder. So that was my first plank. The second challenge that you're going to face when designing change is the fact that you have infinite possibilities. You can do anything to anything. This is daunting for me, and especially difficult is getting your colleagues aligned, because when you're imagining the infinite possibilities, it's really hard to pick just one. This is one of the things that I have the hardest time with. The thing that I tend to use to create alignment is this idea of the North Star. Now, we had North Star metrics at previous companies and have them at Bitly. But I think we use the metaphor of the North Star wrong. When people navigate using the stars, they're not going to the star. They're not headed to the big ball of gas in the sky. They're using the star to tell them if they're on the right path. So when we use North Stars as goals, I think we're using them wrong. We should be using them as guides. The North Stars that I like to use are design principles. This is a set of posters I made at the Wall Street Journal when I worked there. These are our design principles that we use to redesign the newsroom tools that got the news published every day. I have 4 simple rules for writing good design principles. First, good design principles are memorable. Short words, not many of them. Keep it to 6 or 7. Second of all, good design principles help you say no. There are more wrong directions than right ones, and a good design principle should help you know the difference. Third, good design principles are not truisms, and what I mean by that is that your design principles should be very specifically applicable to your team. An example of a design principle that's not a very good one is make users happy. Nobody starts a project out and says, you know what, let's not make users happy today. So make users happy is a truism. Don't use that one. Lastly, good design principles are easy to use. You shouldn't have to think too hard to apply them to your everyday work. I'll give you another example of a design principle that doesn't fit this criteria. I won't tell you where it's from. The design principle is material is the metaphor. I still haven't figured out exactly what that means. It's not easy to use. I've created a workshop, and you can download all the materials to run it yourself. And it'll allow you to write design principles with your team in 1 hour, or your money back. And I've used this workshop a lot over the past few years to create North Stars with my teams. These are Bitly's design principles, work in progress. I have not had time to make cool posters for them yet. But I'm really proud of them because they're creating alignment for our team and they're allowing us to work together towards a common goal. But these aren't the goals, these are just the guidelines. The third challenge that you're going to face when designing change is doubt. It's very natural to doubt yourself, if you're me, or your teammates, or the people who are guiding you along the path to change. One of the questions that I get when I'm advocating for change is, all right, Matt, what's the plan? How are you going to get us there? My answer to that is something called a responsive roadmap. You should be familiar with the concept of a roadmap because it's pretty much the product manager's primary job, according to what you actually do. It's something that you spend a lot of time and energy putting together and sharing with stakeholders. But I think that we make our plans in the wrong way. I think we fall into this trap of creating a map to our product and then following it no matter what the reality is. It's like if your GPS was telling you to drive off of a cliff and you just kept on driving because you're like, well, the GPS is the map, it must be right. So I designed a better roadmap. And I'll get to that in a second, but I want to see by a show of hands, how many people have roadmaps that look like this? We have some at Bitly. This is a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart was named after a man named Henry Gantt. Henry Gantt did not invent the Gantt chart, but you know how white guys are. We like to put our names on things. And Gantt charts were used at the turn of the century to plan and map and understand factories and military operations at a really big scale. And Gantt charts were really useful because they allowed factory managers and commanders to see very complicated processes and to squeeze out all the little bits of efficiency that they could. You see, at the time, work was going through a big change. All of a sudden, instead of having a few people who could build an entire machine themselves, you had hundreds of workers, each performing a single task, and it was a little bit too much for one person to keep in their mind. Over the last 100 years, though, our work has changed again. It's gone from being complicated to complex. And this is a really important distinction because things that are complicated have a lot of moving parts, but we know how they work. So my wristwatch is complicated. There's hundreds of tiny little springs and wheels and gears, but it's extremely reliable, and I can depend on it to work. But our work today is complex. Software design management, product management teams, they don't have just a whole lot of moving parts, but they deal with a lot of unknowns, and we deal with a lot of uncertainty. And that's the biggest challenge to creating maps. That's why things like Gantt charts just don't work. So instead of using a Gantt chart to map out the work, I'd like to encourage you to use something called a responsive roadmap. And instead of being a map of time, our whole quarter and all of the features we're going to ship, a responsive roadmap is a map of the uncertainty that we'll face while we're building the product. We start with ambitious objectives. These are the things on the longest time scale with the most uncertainty. And they tell us why we're changing things, why we're doing the work we're doing. Our objectives are guided by measurable key results. Y'all have probably used OKRs, so you're familiar with this process. But our key results tell us what will actually be changing. So what is it that will tell us that the change is happening? Key results are impacted by concrete targets. So we're moving down steps in complexity, and we're moving on shorter and shorter time scales. Concrete targets will tell us when we should actually look to see if things have changed. It doesn't make much sense to, as much as I'm guilty of doing it, to sit there and look at the analytics every single day. So our concrete targets will help us communicate with our stakeholders when they can expect to see the changes happening. And then we actually go out and map those targets into projects, which are finally when we get to the how. How are we going to change? So these are things with very short time scales, very low degrees of uncertainty. An example from the bit.ly.com redesign is that our ambitious objective was a big 4-year leap. That was going to be guided by, in one way, we were looking for a 20% increase in daily new signups. One of the ways we were going to go out and get this done is by creating a new hero component that was going to be on all of the pages. So once we got that launched, we knew that we could check the metrics and see what had changed. And in order to get that component done, one of the things we needed to do in the short term was to make some decisions about type and illustration. So this was it. This was the roadmap. There are no dates or times on this, which stress my stakeholders out, but it was a really powerful tool to admit that we don't know everything about the future. We don't know exactly how we're going to be changing things, but we know the direction we're headed in, and we have a good place to start. So you can see how all of these things kind of nest together and how it all kind of works in concert to produce a single unified map. You can read a little bit more about responsive roadmaps. I wrote a lot about them. The fourth and final challenge that you're going to face when designing change is the feeling of diminishing returns. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this feeling that when you start a project, the first few days of it are thrilling. You feel like you're making tons of progress. Each little change really gets everybody excited, but after a while, the same changes, the same steps forward just aren't quite as exciting. It's the difference between turning 3, turning 13, and turning 30. Doesn't quite feel the same. So the question that I often ask myself is, how do I keep going? How do I keep up that enthusiasm? The answer to this question is feedback loops. Now, feedback loops are another metaphor that I think we get wrong. We tend to focus on the loop part. We do iterations, we do sprints. Every quarter, we look back, we look forward, and we just do the same thing over and over again. But we don't really do much changing to the process itself. That's where we'd get the feedback from. Doing a loop without any feedback, just doing the same thing over and over again, that's just an echo. So to inspire me and to figure out how to design a better feedback loop, I looked into something called Kalman filtering. Kalman filtering was invented in the 1960s. Its first application was on the Apollo 11 lunar lander. It's still being used today to help autonomous vehicles drive themselves. And the way it works is this. First, you make a prediction about where you are in space. Second, you measure. You take a reading from your sensors and you check to see how your prediction matches. Third, you make an update. So you don't just update your heading and the speed that you're going, but you also update your prediction engine. So if your prediction was wrong, then you know to tweak things a little bit. So it'll be a little bit more accurate next time. And then you repeat this over and over again until you land on the moon. This is a very powerful mental model because you'll notice that the actual updating, the change to the course, only happens after we've predicted and we've measured. So we actually delay doing anything until the last possible second. This is an idea that I've applied in my design teams. I call it just-in-time design. And it's changing our sprint cycle so that designers are working as close to the metal as possible. Designers are trying to finish the design just when it's going out the door and not a second earlier. So 4 rules for just-in-time design. First, invest in a design system. You've probably been hearing this over and over again. You'll hear it more today and tomorrow. But a design system helps your team make decisions quickly without too much investment. Second, ship in the smallest increments possible. So when I was talking about that Kalman loop, the Kalman filtering, the goal was to run it as quickly as possible so that you could constantly be refining your prediction and you could be constantly making course adjustments. So when you ship in small increments, it allows you to update your process. Third, it doesn't matter if you're a product manager or a designer or an analyst or a researcher or an engineer, be as embedded as possible with the work. Go to stand up every single day. Work with the team that's actually building. Especially if you're a C-suite member or an executive, get down on the ground and work with the people that are doing the work. Lastly, don't create a backlog of designs. Design does not age very well. And if you're creating a lot of design 1, 2, 3 sprints ahead, I guarantee you that you'll learn something new in between the time that you finish that design and the time that the design is shipped. So don't create a backlog of design. We have our first plank. We have our North Stars. We have our map. And we have our feedback loops. Let's put it all together. See how we net it out. So this is where bitly.com started. And after all of this change, here's where it ended up. Stunned silence. Is this innovative design? No, it's not. I'm not going to win any design awards for bitly.com. I know that. But did it accomplish our objectives? Yes, we did. We blew our objectives out of the water. When we launched the new bitly.com, we saw more than 50% increase in daily new signups. We saw an accessibility score through Google Lighthouse accessibility audit. We increased our score of more than 20%. We still have a lot of work to do, but this was a very important accomplishment for me personally. Aside from the numbers, though, we accomplished a lot subjectively. We designed this thing 100% in-house, and I don't know what you think of when you think of Bitly, but our design team is 3.5 people. We did this in an incredibly cross-functional and collaborative way. We worked with sales, marketing, CS. We worked with all of the finance folks and our executive stakeholders. And we did it all in 4 months, start to finish. First plank to shipped website. And we got to do some really amazing things with the creative expression of Bitly's brand, which, like I said, had not really changed in 4 years. I have to give so much credit to our wonderful designers, Lizzie and Eddie and Snigdha and Adele, who all showed a willingness to experiment and to follow me when I said, let's change some things. And the results I could not be more proud of. That's it. We've changed things.
What's the best way to measure if your change was successful?
That's a great question. And I think that question was asked a little bit earlier to Maggie, who said something that really struck me as true, and that while measuring is important, sometimes you have to look at what you did and say, I don't really care what the measurement is. I did a good job. Beyond that, though, to tell your boss how you actually did, take a lot of ground truth measurements before you start. And pick a couple of measurements that are easy to measure. You don't want to have to bother your BI folks every other day. Get something that you can check frequently and share in a very simple format.
Okay. What do you think of setting design principles per project initiative in addition to team design principles?
Yes.
That's a good answer. Okay.
The more principles, the better. Rewrite your principles all the time. Always be checking in against them. Feel free to change your mind.
Okay. How do you get developer engineer buy-in on your design principles to help support the design process?
That's a great question. The workshop that I designed is actually for people who aren't designers to be included in the process. So when you write your design principles, invite the engineers, invite the researchers, invite the product managers, invite as many people as possible. Writing those together will make it so that you don't even need the buy-in. You did it together, so everybody's on the same page.
I'm going to dig a little deeper into
Yes.
that. So, like, there's many methods that I imagine you could go through to create those. Is that a meeting? Is that a Google Doc? Is that whatever works best for you? Like, how do you encourage that behavior?
The first key is keeping it as simple as possible and not asking a lot of time from anyone or mental overhead. So one of the ways I designed this workshop is it's just an hour. You don't need to prepare for it at all. And you can do it, once a month if you need to. And the key to that is, like I said earlier with the institutional immune system, is you want to make it so easy for people to be a part of the process that they're not even thinking about it, that they're almost participating unwillingly. I mean, I'm not suggesting that you kidnap anybody, but maybe.
I love that. So Ashley asks, how do you coordinate and share these roadmaps across teams? I think we just kind of covered that a little bit, but
Yeah, again, the least effort wins. So you can use a Google Doc, you can use a giant Post-it note. Actually, at a previous job, all the product managers had big poster-sized Post-its that they would run around with to meetings, and they just like put them up in every single meeting that they had, just sort of to remind you what the roadmap was.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Was that effective?
It involved, it was funny because every time we'd be walking around the office and we'd see like a trail of Post-it notes, you'd be like, oh, product manager was just here.
Oh man, I love that so much. Okay. How do you pace design deliverables with a dev team? You said don't have a design backlog, but you don't want devs to twiddle their thumbs either. What do you do?
Yeah. So I heard the D word, deliverables.
Oh, I thought developers. Okay, deliverables.
No, we
All
like
right.
developers. We hate deliverables. My advice is that if an engineer is twiddling their thumbs, you should probably go and work with them on something. Say like, hey, let's work on this together. So oftentimes I'll sit down with my engineers and I'll say, here's what I'm thinking. How would you do this? And, let's work on it together. Show me what you're working on. Any engineers here have probably done pair coding, where you sit with another engineer and one person drives and the other one kind of looks and thinks. We should be doing that as designers with engineers and product managers. We should be pair coding and pair designing and co-creating.
Cool. Vera asks, ship in the smallest, she's quoting you, ship in the smallest increments possible. Does that imply the design is also done in small pieces, or the big picture design is broken down and developed in small pieces?
So make sure that when you're thinking through your design, that you're, if you do have a big picture, make sure you can actually break it into discrete pieces, because as you actually go out and build that design, you're going to be learning a lot about it and how it works, if it matches the reality of your users or not. And so the more you can break it apart, the more iterative you can be. And I use this idea of iterative versus incremental. Incremental is starting and just sort of building it piece by piece until you're done with the whole thing. It's like the joke about eating the elephant. But iterative is actually starting with something and modifying it and changing it as a whole over time. So be as iterative as possible with your designs. Try to avoid being too incremental.
Okay. Thank you. Let's give Matt another round of applause.